But I'm delighted, everybody, to welcome you to Uniting Business Live, the first virtual forum for the United Nations Global Compact. And we have a wonderful session today, just a half hour, but with two incredible experts on global governance. My name is, I lead global partnerships at the Julianne Wrigley Global Institute of Sustainability and the Julianne Wrigley Global Futures Laboratory at Arizona State University. So I'm excited to be here with you today because this topic is just so critical. We are at 2020 and in no country in the world has full gender equality yet been achieved. What is even more interesting is that as we look at the ravaging effects of COVID-19 and the coronavirus, where women have been disproportionately negatively impacted, and we look at governments around the world, and we see that of the 8% of women who are actually leading countries, 40% of the most successful responses to COVID have come from just those 8% of women leaders. So really today we're going to be speaking to Augusto Lopez Claros and Mickey Kettleson today about this critical topic of gender and governance and why we really need to focus on this as a critical issue, not just for gender equality, but for global well-being. 3 days ago, a new study came out on global well-being. And again, the top 4 countries in the world who have the highest rankings are all run by women, including my own native New Zealand with our Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. And the 3 countries which ranked lowest and have in fact gone backwards over the last few years are all run by men, the United States, Hungary, and Brazil. So it's really timely for us to be focused on this topic. To give a quick introduction to my 2 experts, Augusto Lopez Claros is the chair of the Global Governance Forum, a very well-known economist globally. Augusto had senior roles at the World Bank, where he was in charge of the Indicators Division and ran, by dint of that, a project which I am very proud to have started at the World Bank called Women, Business and the Law. And he has also held senior roles at the World Economic Forum, where he oversaw the Global Gender Gap Report, and also at the International Monetary Fund. So Augusto, it's a great pleasure to have you with us. And I know Chloe is going to continue to work with you to make sure we can get you on visual as well. And Mickey Kettleson is a professor at the School of Politics and Global Studies at Arizona State University. And together we are on our cross ASU SDG 5 Changemakers Coalition, where we're doing some fabulous work together. And Mickey's research looks at democratic inclusion across a variety of countries. She has authored a number of books, peer-reviewed journal articles and book chapters, and her work has been funded by the National Science Foundation, USAID, and the AAUW. Now, I'm particularly interested in her very recent book, which I'm going to ask her about, called Seeing Women, Strengthening Democracy: How Women in Politics Foster Connected Citizens. And that looks at the effect of gender quotas and women's election to office for mass level political engagement across Latin America. Now, I know your work also looks at gender equality in peak courts, but Mickey, let's start with your recent book. Tell us a little bit about this.
Great, yes. So this book is with Professor Magda Hinojosa, who is my colleague in the School of Politics and Global Studies. So I know there are some students on right now and they could take a course from her as well. She is our expert on Latin America. So I was a newcomer to learning about Latin America. But the overall message of the book is that in places where women go from being largely excluded from elected office to being elected in numbers that are visible, we see a shrinking of differences in political engagement, gender differences in political engagement. So there had been these persistent gaps and what I mean by engagement is like political interest. So women would be, a couple percentage points lower, maybe 5, 10 percentage points lower in terms of reporting being interested in politics, or feeling connected in other ways, feeling efficacious, like they can make a difference with their participation. And so after we look specifically at a nice natural experiment, we look at Uruguay, where we knew ahead of time with quotas there was going to be this big jump in women's representation, and we did this survey before and after, and lo and behold, with the same people controlling for all the same sorts of things, we see women become more politically interested, more politically knowledgeable, more engaged in the democratic process. So we know that by inclusion at the elite level, it has effects for ordinary people. And so I'm very excited about the book as well.
Fantastic. And Vicky, you and I have been working with Augusto on an exciting new project that he has been leading with a range of experts from around the world. Augusto, we would love to hear from you and why you have established the Global Governance Forum. I'm delighted to serve on the board, and your latest project on really focusing on helping to move the dial forward on gender equality and governance. And welcome. We're so glad you're with us, even if we can't see you.
Hello, Amanda, and hello, Nikki. It's a pleasure to participate in this panel with you, even though for technical reasons I don't seem to be visible. In terms of the Global Governance Forum, I guess the motivation for launching this organization is essentially to create an institutional vehicle for thinking about the kinds of issues that we have raised in our recently published book, Global Governance and the Emergence of Global Institutions for the 21st Century. This came out by Cambridge University Press earlier this year, and it is an attempt to basically rethink our global governance architecture. Myself, as well as Arthur Dahl and Maya Groth, my two co-authors, feel very strongly that the UN system that was created in 1945 is no longer fit for purpose. I think it was an important initiative after the end of World War II to think about what kind of framework would be supportive of international cooperation and what kind of an institutional infrastructure would actually allow us to establish peace and security in the world. But it hasn't worked very effectively. And 75 years later, we find that we are facing a whole range of very, very important challenges, climate change, widening income disparities, nuclear proliferation, and a whole range of other problems, which cannot be solved outside of a framework of international cooperation. And so the Global Governance Forum essentially is an organization where we hope over the next few years to be thinking hard about what are the steps that need to be taken in order to strengthen our global governance architecture so as to create conditions for more effective international cooperation to address all of these challenges. One aspect of this whole debate, concerns what has been happening in the world in recent decades on the issue of gender. As you very well know, we're coming out of several centuries where women have essentially been treated as second-class citizens. You're very familiar with the kind of data that has been compiled by the World Bank, tracking discriminations embedded in the law of 190 countries. And you know that we have a very serious problem. It is true, we have made progress in the last 100 years in integrating women into the job market, in empowering her politically, but the gap with respect to full equality is still very, very large. And so one of the areas where the Global Governance Forum will be working in coming years is essentially trying to promote the issue of gender equality and trying to highlight some of the costs associated with discrimination against women and continuing to essentially withhold women and prevent her from making her contribution to the economy, to politics, to decision making. The data that you gave on management of COVID-19 thus far across the planet, makes, I think, a very compelling case that by not having women present in economic and political decision making, we pay a very heavy price.
And it has been fascinating to see the recent work done by the International Finance Corporation that also shows that women in positions of governance from the local level right through are more likely, 54% more likely, to think that issues of sustainability are important. And you mentioned climate change, Augusto. Of course, that's so critical. Having been ambassador to the United Nations during the time that we negotiated the Sustainable Development Goals, I think a dirty little secret is also the fact that while we have SDG 5 to promote gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls, when we come to certain aspects of it and look at the indicators, the very unfortunately property rights, we lost the debate, we lost the argument, and we were overridden in for gender equality and property rights. And if you read closely, it says in accordance with national laws. And if we look at national laws, we know that only 8 countries in the world currently have gender equality fully enshrined in law. So we certainly have a long way to go. Now, Nikki, I wonder if you would like to comment a little on the important work that Augusto has been leading around the index. Give us some of your insights. I know you were contributing some very new data sets. Give us some insights on why you think that this is going to be such an important tool.
Yes, well, I think that this index is quite unique in its comprehensiveness. And so I'm really pleased to be a part of the team working on this. And so a lot of times when we think about women in decision making, we think, and there's a lot of attention to elected positions, to perhaps cabinets even sometimes. But in addition, the courts are integral, right? And there has been less focus on the courts. So this index has a measure which comes from my work with some co-authors on women on high courts, the Supreme or constitutional courts around the world. And one of the reasons that that is so important is we think about the importance of this legislation, the laws that you're talking about, the laws and the institutions, quite important. But the courts adjudicate on these things, right? So we can have the laws and they could be interpreted in different ways, or they can be struck down as unconstitutional. And so having the presence of women in the courts that makes these decisions is a really important part that I think has been overlooked in the past. So I think that brings something to this very comprehensive index. The index looks at, it thinks of governance as being more than just elected officials or heads of state, but it thinks about governance in the way that we should think about governance, right? Decision-making levels. And in fact, as part of the Global Futures Lab at ASU, which is a big part of what we're doing today, there are some different theme areas, and I'm part of the theme area on governance and decision making in the Global Futures Lab at ASU, and that's exactly what we're looking at. So I think it's really important to think about decision making across levels, from the local to the national to the international, and it makes things more complex. But by looking at all of those levels, we have a better understanding of governance.
That Dave White has just put in the chat a very pertinent comment. Women belong in all places where decisions are being made. It shouldn't be that women are the exception. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and of course, we are all devastated by her very untimely death. She was a towering figure in metaphorical terms in the way in which she was able to bring about legal change in the US, and many of you will have seen On the Basis of Sex, the brilliant movie about her. And we are trying now to with the partnership of the Global Governance Forum, the UN, the World Bank, the International Parliamentary Union, and a range of other political bodies to actually run a campaign to argue that there are a number of very important elements of SDG 5, not least gender equality under the law, but also gender equality in leadership. And if we have time at the end of this session, given that you have so many of your students here, Mickey, we will show the beginnings of a campaign that will be launched by Foreign Policy in a week or so, which will really highlight these laws and the way in which people can get involved to help move the dial both on gender equality under the law and on gender equality in governance. So Augusto, I would love to move back to you and just hear from your many years of experience as a global gender expert and champion, and we certainly need more wonderful male allies like you and Dave White. Can you tell us some of the new elements of the index that you think are particularly important? We use some of the data from Women, Business and the Law, but there are other elements such as a clause around gender equality in the Constitution, for example. Would you like to tell us a little bit about what you, with your particular lens as a global expert, see as particularly new and exciting? And I know you can't tell us everything because the index is still under wraps before it's launched, but just give us a little taste of what you think is important.
Thank you, Amanda. I'm happy to comment on this. You know, in thinking about what are the factors, the policies, the institutions which have a bearing on the whole subject of gender equality, you know, one can sort of make up a list, and eventually one will come up with a large number of these factors which affect our understanding of gender equality. And so what we have done in building the index is essentially created sort of 5 broad categories. We call them pillars, that capture different dimensions of what it is that we're trying to measure. So we have a pillar called governance and equality, where we look at, for instance, the kinds of legal provisions that exist in a country. Does the Constitution contain a clause on equality? If there is a non-discrimination clause, does it explicitly mention sex or gender? Has CEDAW been ratified, and so on? And these particular factors that we're looking at are trying to capture a sense of the legal framework at the international level for 158 countries. We also bring in a few other dimensions. For instance, we think that creating a context for entrepreneurship and for allowing women, to integrate themselves into the economy is tremendously important. I think women's economic empowerment is one very important aspect of essentially creating a more friendly framework for women all over the world. And the reason this is important is because a number of studies have shown that when women can join the workforce, and especially in the context of the family, if they are contributing to family income, they are actually empowered to make decisions as to how to allocate those resources. A woman that brings money to the family has a much bigger say in terms of how to use those resources. And the data shows that actually in those cases, more money gets spent on education, more money gets spent on health. The investment decisions that the family makes are wiser. The savings behavior is actually also better. And all of this has obviously implications for the economy. And so our index brings in some aspects of entrepreneurship, what we call, the ability for a woman to do business. Can she sign a contract? Can she open up a bank account? Can she register a business without having to clear those decisions, with her husband or with her partner? So I would regard this as being one important element of the index. We have other variables that capture, the quality, the context for equality in education, for violence against women. We are suffering an epidemic of violence against women, and COVID-19, as you well know, has basically worsened the problem because of the lockdowns, because women cannot be out there, but are confined to be at home with their partners. The data from a number of countries in the world shows a very dire situation on the violence against women front. And so in our index, we capture many different aspects of the environment that creates a safer context for women. Have countries introduced laws on domestic violence? Is there legislation on sexual harassment in employment? Is there a preference for sons in societies, which then manifests in female infanticide? As you know, this is a serious problem in countries like India and China. And so I come back to the point made by Mickey. It is a fairly comprehensive look at a whole range of factors which have a bearing on gender equality. And we're very much looking forward to launching this index in coming weeks.
Thank you, Augusto. And I think we're very much looking forward to having the index out there in the public arena. You made such an important point about COVID. COVID has hit women so much harder than men. And in my country, New Zealand, 90% harder, which is a pretty frightening statistic. And of course, it has exacerbated inequalities all over the world. The data that I've seen most recently shows also your very good point about economics, and that a gender-informed COVID response is likely to add something like $13 trillion, according to McKinsey, by 2030. So it is a very strong economic case, as you point out. We're going to show now just a little piece of a video. It's about a minute, 30 seconds, and Jason is kindly here to do that. It's our leadership video, which really does give insights into gender and governance. And if, Jason, you let us know when you're ready to go, and we can resume the conversation. This is a video that's been prepared with a range of partners, including the Global Governance Forum. As though that is not going to work with this platform. But Mickey, I know you'll be able to show that to at least your students. And for those who are following us in the chat, we will be launching the video with a campaign with foreign policy. And Chloe will put in the chat as well a note so that you can see how to come to our landing page and view these videos. Part of what we're trying to do is work with parliamentarians in particular, and as both Mickey and Augusto said, across all levels of government, to really illustrate the positive benefits of gender equality. It is extraordinary that here we are in 2020 and we have not yet achieved gender equality in a single country. So with only 8 countries having achieved gender equality under the law, there is a long way to go. And with Women, Business and the Law from the World Bank, we do know that in 10 years that the data has been produced, there have been some 260 reforms. And that is why it is so important to shine a spotlight on the data and help encourage change. And that's exactly what we hope that the new index from the Global Governance Forum will help people do as well. So Jason's ready to try again. Let's see if we can make it work this time. Please, everybody, mute yourselves and we'll see if this works.
In 2015, every United Nations member state made the commitment to ensure women's full and effective participation and equal opportunities for leadership. This builds on previous international commitments like the 1995 Beijing Platform for Action. The rationale is not just equity, fairness, and rights and representation, but also because it makes for stronger governance and better economic outcomes. The diversity dividend is well documented. In the private sector, more women in senior managerial positions and on boards correlates with an increased return on investment. In governance bodies, gender balance correlates with increased emphasis on long-term growth drivers, like environmental sustainability, education, and health. So with such a strong case for gender balance, what's the current state of play? 1 in 4 parliamentarians is now female. Only 1 in 5 speakers of parliament or government ministers is a woman. And less than 7% of country leaders are women. In the private sector, almost 1/3 of companies globally have no women at all in board positions. A new index provides some insight. In a survey of 10,000 respondents in 2019, more than half expressed discomfort with women as leaders in both corporate and political life. So with progress this slow and challenges persisting, what works?
Thank you. So you can see that we won't go into what works, but that is really the big question. And this, we could have talked for many more hours. We have just a couple of minutes left. So I'm going to ask Mickey and then Augusto to leave us with one thought. What is it that our audience members can do to really make a difference? And Augusto, we also have a question from Vanessa Romero, who is asking you, how can somebody be part of the Global Governance Forum to help out? So I'm sure that Augusto will be very happy to have that offer of assistance, Vanessa. So Mickey, what is your one takeaway for our audience in terms of how they can help shift attitudes, be allies, and really shift the dial on this important issue of gender and governance?
I'll be really quick. I think it's a shift in mindset from thinking about the sorts of things that women in training or more education or women need more of this or that, that places the onus on women themselves for the unequal situation. Instead, it's the institutions that need to be transformed.
Thank you. Augusto.
One of the reasons I'm very excited about the Gender Equality and Governance Index is because when you deliver data to the world, to the international community, to civil society organizations, to governments, when you allow them to track their progress over time, then you create a context for reform and for transformation. We have seen that in some measure with the Women, Business and the Law data at the World Bank. And we hope to do the same with our own index. We are going to publish it annually. We're going to update the database, and we're going to have a very active debate across the world on why some countries are doing well and others are lagging behind.
Thank you. And that is a perfect note on which to end. Context for reform and transformation. And of course, we hope that that will lead to Mickey's excellent point, a change in mindset that will help change our institutions. Thank you all so much, Mickey Kirusen, Augusto Lopez Claras, and to all of you who have joined us. Please come along to the next session in our ASU Julianne Wrigley sessions, and we look forward to continuing this conversation. Thank you so much.